Samburu Reserve, early morning. A single sound broke the dry hush that clung to the landscape, a long, guttural cry full of raw agony and weariness. It was not the trumpet of alarm or low rumble of communication. It was sharper, fragmented, rising like something torn. Rangers stationed near the ridgeline paused mid-scan, eyes lifting toward the source. Without speaking, they loaded into the truck and followed the sound. A dusty trail lifting behind their tires as the landscape shifted from red clay to scattered brush. Minutes later, they arrived at a bend where erosion had carved a shallow ditch into the earth. There, sprawled at an unnatural angle and flanked by silence, lay the matriarch of a small elephant herd. She wasn't dead. Her sides lifted and fell in heavy rhythm, but her body was too still. Her rear leg was bent beneath her, the joint swollen, the skin split from internal pressure and laced with grit. Blood had dried in thin trails where the skin had cracked open, and her massive head rested awkwardly on the slope beside the ditch. Two younger elephants stood a few meters away, shifting uneasily, their ears twitching, trunks occasionally reaching toward her but recoiling each time they touched the air between them. One of them, a calf no older than 2, stepped closer and let out a soft, confused chirp, pressing his face to her flank. She didn't respond. Ranger Elias, who had worked this quadrant of Samburu for nearly a decade, stepped down first. The expression on his face was unreadable as he approached, stopping just short of the elephant's head. Her left eye blinked slowly, half-lidded, barely focused, but aware. She was conscious. He knelt, his boots flattening a patch of thorny grass, and examined the damage in silence. The way she had landed wasn't typical. This hadn't been a violent takedown. There was no sign of predators or a panicked flight. The land around her was undisturbed except for the deep impression where her body had fallen. Her leg had likely folded during a misstep near the ditch's edge. A simple miscalculation, but one that had left a creature weighing nearly 3 tons unable to move. The mobile vet, Dr. Mumby, arrived shortly after. Her approach was slow and practiced, and she was without urgency in her movements. She greeted Elias with a nod, then circled the matriarch once, assessing from a distance before kneeling beside the rear leg. Swelling had already set in, and the elephant flinched as the vet's gloved hands pressed along the joint. A soft rumble came from deep in the matriarch's chest. Not a cry this time, just discomfort, a signal of her awareness. The young calf moved beside them again, placing his trunk gently on her face and releasing a faint wheeze. The matriarch raised her own trunk briefly in response, brushing his ear. Then she let it fall back into the dust. The herd wasn't far. 2 more elephants stood on the distant ridge, their shapes flickering between the sparse trees. They hadn't fled. They were watching, unsure how to proceed without her. Dr. Mumby reached for a mild sedative, just enough to dull the pain and give the matriarch a chance to rest. The jab at her shoulder was quick and carefully placed. There was no resistance. That alone told them something else. Her energy reserves were already dipping. The injury alone wasn't fatal yet, but if she remained down through the hottest part of the day, her body could begin to shut down. Dehydration, shock, and tissue compression would follow. If the bone was fractured beneath the swelling, infection was not far behind. The ditch was only half a meter deep, carved not by recent rains but by years of wind and seasonal flow. It wasn't the kind of place that should bring down a leader, but even matriarchs have limits. Her foot had likely slipped, her weight had shifted, and the injury had occurred in seconds. No sign of gunshots, no signs of human interference, but the impact of her fall was no less severe just because it was natural. Dr. Mumby stood back and adjusted her vest. "We wait," she said softly, mostly to Elias. "If she can try to stand by sundown, we work with her. If not—" She glanced toward the ridge, where the rest of the herd watched. "We'll have to lift her, and pray she tolerates it." Elias said nothing. He knew what sedation, cranes, and relocation meant for animals this size. The process was long and full of risk. Sometimes it worked. Other times, it didn't. The calf settled beside his mother now, curling against her side like a shadow. He occasionally reached up to tug on her ear or pressed against her trunk with his own. Each gesture was met with a tiny shift of her eye, a faint stir of breath. But the matriarch didn't try to move. They laid out a tarp for shade and brought water from the truck. The vet sprayed a cooling mist over the elephant's back. They waited as the sun rose higher and heat rippled off the ground, watching the slow rhythm of her breath and the calf who refused to leave her side. If she didn't move by sunset, the next step would begin, and with it, a fragile line between recovery and goodbye. The heat began rising just past mid-morning. The air settled thick over the flatlands as the sun climbed, and the matriarch remained motionless in the dust, her chest lifting in slow, strained intervals. Her calf pressed close again, resting his small, round forehead against the thick folds of her upper leg. She didn't stir. Dr. Mumby moved along the flank now, her hands methodical, eyes narrowing as her fingers traced not just swelling but deep contusions modeling the shoulder, ribs, and upper spine. The bruising pattern didn't match a fall. It spread too widely, too uniformly. Something had struck her more than once. Ranger Elias leaned in, his voice low and controlled. "Not from the ditch," he said. The vet nodded once, quietly. They both knew this meant something else. Across the clearing, two members of the herd paced in loose, irregular lines, never far, but never still. A subadult male paused to watch, ears half flared, trunk lowered. His uncertainty was visible in the way his front foot hovered slightly above the ground before planting itself again. A second, younger female followed him closely, keeping to the edge of the brush. Neither dared approach. Without the matriarch moving, there was no clear signal, no guidance, only tension. Dr. Mumby retrieved a portable ultrasound scanner, gently pressing it along the inner thigh. The leg was not fractured, badly sprained, perhaps ligament damage, but what concerned her more was the internal swelling near the abdomen and thoracic cavity, a possible rib injury. Internal bleeding couldn't be ruled out. With the size of the animal, even a moderate hemorrhage could become fatal without intervention. The bruising across her ribs matched the width of an object, not a rock. Perhaps a timber, a fence post, or the blunt end of a metal bar. Not poachers, not this time, but something violent, something close to human. The elephant's ears shifted slightly, curling at the tips as another fly landed on her cheek. She exhaled slowly, and the dust stirred near her trunk. Her calf had begun pressing small circular motions with his trunk along her side, slow, repetitive, soft. The gesture mirrored the behavior seen when calves attempt to stimulate movement in elders. It was a kind of instinct, born not of thought, but of familiarity. Still, she did not rise. Her limbs quivered once but settled again. Elias stood and looked across the horizon. In the distance, just beyond the ridge, were recent tire tracks leading into a fenced grazing zone. The border between the reserve and a community cattle corridor had always been delicate. Sometimes elephants wandered too close to livestock enclosures or water tanks. Sometimes fear met them there, not with bullets, but with clubs or rocks. Accidents bred confrontation. The matriarch may have led her group too near to a settlement in the early dawn hours and been driven off. No one had reported an incident, but that wasn't unusual. Dr. Mumby applied a topical anti-inflammatory along the bruised areas and adjusted the sedation dose in her notes. Too much intervention too soon would only heighten stress. But time was against them. Each hour the elephant remained immobile increased the risk of muscular damage, organ strain, or collapse from pressure. If she didn't attempt to rise within the next several hours, the window for a natural recovery would close. She needed to shift weight. She needed to stand. The two nearby elephants finally edged closer, 10 meters, then 8. The older of the two lifted his trunk and called once, a low, breathy contact rumble. The matriarch did not answer. Her ear twitched faintly, but her eyes remained closed. A decision would need to be made soon. If sedation wore off too quickly, pain would return in full. If it stayed too long, the body would weaken further. If they moved her and she panicked, the damage might worsen. But if they did nothing, she might not survive the night. The calf, still pressed to her ribs, gave a single, quiet cry. Brief, unsure. No other sound followed. The dust rose again, slowly this time, wind brushing across the injured giant, and the team gathered around her. Dr. Mumby looked to Elias. Neither spoke, but the stakes were now clear. This was no simple rescue. Something brutal had left its mark, and the path forward would demand caution. One wrong move could tip the fragile balance between healing and loss. The day was growing hotter. The light stretched thin across the land, pulling long shadows through the pale grass. The matriarch remained where she had fallen, her breathing shallow, limbs still unwilling to carry her weight. Her calf had curled closer, tucking his small frame into the curve of her belly. The rest of the herd lingered beyond a stand of acacia, unsettled but loyal. No movement had come from her in over an hour. Dr. Mumby wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist and stood slowly. Elias had already begun walking a wide arc around the site, his gaze low, scanning the soil not for animals, but for tracks. A few meters east of the ditch, past a low run of trampled grass, Elias knelt. The marks were faint but clear, deep ruts in the dry earth, two narrow lines side by side. Tire tracks. Not from their own vehicle, nor from the known patrol paths. These had come from the outside and turned sharply through the scrub, ending near a ring of crushed brush. It was not the sign of travel. It was the pattern of something sudden, fast, and reactive. Dr. Mumby joined him quietly. Her voice barely rose above the breeze. "Too close to the fence line," she said. He nodded. From the crushed brush to the ditch was less than 20 meters. The matriarch hadn't fallen by chance. She had been moving quickly, possibly running. Whether from fear or aggression they couldn't yet say. But something had driven her here, fast enough that her body had betrayed her balance. Elias traced the path backward. The vehicle had approached from the northern livestock corridor, an area bordering private land, often the site of quiet disputes. Rangers had responded there before. Elephants occasionally damaged fencing. In return, people threw stones, waved tools, and banged metal. Most incidents passed without harm, but not all. The tire marks veered hard near a thorn bush and vanished into the soil, then reappeared on the slope. There, a clear impression, larger than a shoe, rounder, an elephant's foot, deeply pressed into the earth, then smeared forward, a sign of panic. Not a calm walk, a run. Elias stepped back, scanning the terrain. He followed the line of disturbed vegetation, each broken branch a breadcrumb in a story no one had seen. The matriarch had been fleeing. Whether alone or with the herd, she had passed through here at speed, hit the incline, and collapsed. They were no longer dealing with a simple injury. This was a result of conflict, and that changed what had to happen next. Back at the clearing, Dr. Mumby adjusted the IV line they had set at the matriarch's ear base. Only fluids, not sedation now. They needed her conscious and responsive, but the fluids would help with heat and shock. The calf had not moved from her side, though he now stood instead of lying. His ears drooped low. Occasionally, he reached down to touch her leg with the tip of his trunk. She flicked her tail once, slow and weary. That slight movement gave them something to hold on to. Elias returned from the northern route. He said nothing at first, but his face confirmed what they feared. The rangers had seen it before. Vehicles used to haze elephants away from crops or fences, herded aggressively to protect livestock. Sometimes it was effective. Sometimes it ended like this. There was no sign of poaching, no traps, no wounds from weapons, but this wasn't an accident either. The bruises, the collapse, the shallow track of smeared footprints, it all pointed to forced flight. Elias checked his radio, noting the time. They'd report the tire marks and forward the location. But justice in these cases was rare. The priority now was survival. The herd had edged slightly closer. One adolescent bull stepped past the line of brush, pausing only a few paces from where the matriarch lay. His posture was tense, not aggressive. He exhaled sharply and waited. Dr. Mumby stood still. If they crowded her, she wouldn't be able to rise. If they scattered again, the calf would refuse to follow. But without their leader upright, the cohesion of the group was beginning to fray. Every passing hour mattered. The risk of organ compression was growing. If she didn't stand soon, her body could begin to shut down. If they tried to move her while she was weak, she could resist and injure herself further. The bull turned slightly, flicked an ear, and released a soft rumble. A call. Not urgent, just acknowledgement. Then he stepped back, retreating to the shade. A breeze moved through the dry grass. Dust curled near the injured elephant's flank. She shifted her trunk an inch. Not enough to rise, but enough to say she was still here, still trying. The wind picked up briefly, moving the acacia leaves with a dry whisper as the tracks behind them slowly faded beneath the settling dust. The wind had settled again, and with it came the dry hush that often arrives before something shifts. The matriarch had not moved more than a breath for hours, and the calf had remained at her side without leaving once. Around them, the herd held its distance, watching with uneasy stillness. The temperature had begun its slow descent, but the pressure on her organs had been building since sunrise. Time was not on their side. Dr. Mumby adjusted the IV line, eyes flicking toward the leg once more. Then, without signal or sound, the elephant began to stir. Her front legs tensed first. The right elbow twitched, then slowly pushed against the earth. The shoulder followed, a slow, shaking rise that shifted her weight forward. Dust slid from her skin in soft clouds. One forefoot planted, then the other. She braced herself on the trembling limbs, shoulders heaving with effort. Her head lifted, low but off the ground, and for a moment it looked as if she might find the strength to stand. Her ears quivered, her eyes narrowed. She leaned forward, steadying through the pain. Then her back leg gave out. The right hind joint collapsed inward with a dull thud, sending her flank crashing down. The force knocked the IV loose. She moaned, not loudly, but in a low, breathless sound that made the youngest calf cry out in return. He rushed forward, stumbling in his panic, and tucked himself beneath her trunk, nudging it with the side of his head. She let it drape over him like a fallen branch. The effort had drained her. Her breathing was now ragged and short, with longer pauses between each inhale. Dr. Mumby stepped forward and reconnected the fluid line. The dose of pain relief had helped, but only temporarily. The vet crouched low beside her and whispered, "We don't have long." Elias radioed back to base with a single update. His tone remained steady, but his hand lingered on the receiver. They would need to prepare the lifting rig, though it would take hours. If she could not rise by the second attempt, her organs might begin to fail. No matter how calm the setting appeared, every minute was shifting the odds. Lying for too long crushed the body from within. If her leg was dislocated, or worse, if it had torn at the joint, the damage could not be undone with time alone. The herd stepped closer. The subadult bull led, his movements slow and heavy. He let out a deep rumble and stood parallel to the calf, just a few steps from the matriarch's side. His body blocked the light briefly, casting a moving shadow across her flank. She did not acknowledge him, but her ear twitched at the sound. The calf looked between them and made a small chuffing sound, rubbing his trunk back and forth along the curve of her jaw. She didn't respond, but her eye blinked once, slowly, still aware, still trying. Dr. Mumby stepped back. They could not force her up again too soon. The muscle strain was too great. Another failed rise would not only sap what little strength she had left, it could tear something further. But if they waited too long, the fluid build up in her lungs, the pressure on her heart, and the strain in the spine would cross a line that no field medicine could correct. The balance was narrowing. This was the quiet edge where survival flickered between motion and stillness. Elias paced a short line behind the group, scanning the ridge where the truck carrying the lifting sling would eventually appear. They had hours, at most. The procedure would be risky. It involved ropes, harnesses, and the slow coaxing of instinct into trust. Not every elephant tolerated the pressure. If she panicked, the team would need to back away entirely, and without the matriarch standing, her calf might not follow the herd. Separation would leave him vulnerable. He was too young to survive alone. The sky was fading into its softer shade now, colors pulling wider across the horizon. The calf had lowered himself beside her again, one small foot pressed gently to her shoulder. Her trunk lay still, curved along the dirt. The herd remained nearby, forming a quiet half-circle. The wind brushed across the grass once more, lifting pale dust into the air and carrying it west. The elephant's breathing slowed, but she was still with them, still waiting, still holding. The earth around her settled into silence again. The sky deepened as the afternoon folded into its final hours. The stillness around the injured matriarch had grown heavier. Her earlier attempt to rise had taken more than just strength. It had taken what little margin of safety she had left. Now her limbs lay slack, her breathing shallow but consistent. The calf, exhausted, leaned into the curve of her shoulder, resting without sleep. Dr. Mumby watched her chest rise and fall, then signaled to Elias with a slow nod. The next step had to be taken. Not to move her, not yet, but to prevent further decline. The choice was one of caution, sedation to relieve strain and allow fluid treatment, knowing it would delay movement but possibly save her from collapse. Dr. Mumby prepared the injection slowly, measuring each step with practiced calm. She approached from the flank, voice low, her movements deliberate and free of tension. The matriarch didn't resist. Her eye flickered briefly, but there was no lift in her trunk, no stir in her massive shoulders. The needle was placed behind the ear, where the skin folded gently. A measured dose, not enough to make her sleep, but just enough to ease the pain and quiet the body's panic. As the medication took hold, the elephant's chest began to rise with more steadiness. The rigid tension in her limbs softened slightly. It wasn't recovery, but it was relief. The herd shifted almost immediately. The subadult bull began circling wide, trunk lifted, ears held at half-span. Not aggressive, but unsettled. A juvenile female took 3 uncertain steps forward, then stopped. The group's formation tightened around the edges. Their leader was still down. They could see her chest moving, but nothing else. No contact rumbles came from her, no signals. Their unease settled into the air like dust. They did not flee, but they didn't rest either. They waited. Elias walked toward the comms truck, speaking softly into the radio. The lifting rig team had been standing by since midday. Now the request was official. If the matriarch did not stand by sunset, the relocation would begin. It was not a simple procedure. It involved canvas slings, padded braces, and mechanical pulleys. The equipment itself wasn't the danger. It was her response to it. Some elephants tolerated the pressure, the sensation of being lifted, of losing control for a brief moment. Others fought, panicked mid-hoist, or collapsed under the weight once lowered. The sedation helped reduce that risk but didn't erase it. If her spine had been damaged in the fall, the lift could worsen it. But if they left her lying through another night, the pressure on her lungs and organs could become irreversible. Dr. Mumby walked the perimeter once more, checking for new signs of swelling or distress. The bruising had darkened along the ribs. There was still no sign of active bleeding, but that could change quickly. The wound wasn't external. It was inside, the kind that spread quietly, the kind you couldn't see until it was too late. She adjusted the IV again. The fluids were absorbing well. That was one mercy. It meant her veins were still responsive. The line held steady in the soft skin behind her shoulder. The team moved gently around her, brushing flies from her ears, keeping her skin cool with cloth and mist. They spoke very little. Most of what needed saying had already been said. The calf stirred again, lifting his trunk and running it once along her jaw. She didn't move in reply, but her eye opened slightly and stayed open. He paused, then laid his head down near hers. The only sound came from the breeze in the grass and the occasional low rumble from the herd, restless but rooted. They had not left her, even as the hours passed. The sun was now low enough to turn the grass amber. The light softened and the shadows stretched longer. The vet checked her watch and nodded once. Preparations would begin soon. If she rose before then, it would be her choice. If not, it would be theirs, and the risks would multiply either way. The silence around the matriarch was no longer passive. It was a space held open for possibility, a waiting place, a pause before whatever came next. The air moved gently over her still frame, and in the distance the wind turned the grass in slow waves. The sun had begun its slow descent, turning the dust into gold and laying soft bands of amber across the grass. Shadows lengthened across the clearing, stretching from the acacia trees to the matriarch's unmoving form. Her eyes were closed now, though her breath still came in steady waves, slower than before, but present. Her limbs had slackened, heavy with sedation, but her body was warm, pulsing gently beneath the dirt that clung to her thick skin. Nothing in her posture suggested surrender, yet nothing signaled strength either. Time had become a waiting place where everything depended on what her body might choose to do next. The smallest calf had not moved from her side. Though the herd lingered a short distance away, occasionally shifting or rumbling in quiet confusion, he remained close enough that his shadow touched hers. He pressed his trunk along her ribs, again and again, sometimes curling it upward as if searching for breath or guidance. There was no response. Her trunk lay still, curved toward the ground, but the rise of her belly told him she was still here. So he waited. The rangers moved softly through the grass. They kept their voices low, their boots slow. Elias returned with 2 buckets of fresh water, one for the matriarch, the other for the calf. Dr. Mumby crouched beside the elephant again, gently brushing the cluster of flies from her eyes and cheeks. The mist bottle hissed once as she sprayed a fine layer across the exposed areas of skin to cool them. The calf flinched at the sound but did not retreat. He turned his head slightly, eyeing the vet with that quiet uncertainty only the young carried, too small to know danger, too attached to pull away. Dr. Mumby reached forward and stroked the edge of his ear, then backed away without a word. A medic checked the IV line. Still secure, still flowing. The heart rate remained low but regular. Internally, they knew the stakes hadn't changed. The risk of organ pressure was rising by the hour. Blood pooling in the lower limbs, tissue starved of oxygen, spine compressed beneath her own weight. If she didn't shift soon, the damage might become permanent, and if that happened, there would be no second chance. She needed to try to rise, one more time, before the last of her resilience dimmed. But sedation clouded those signals, even if it kept her safe from shock. That balance was wearing thin. The herd released a low rumble from the ridge. The juvenile bull paced a line along the slope, then stopped. The others remained still. No one moved closer now. They were waiting for a sign that might not come. Herds were known to grieve, to hover, and to remain near the fallen long after breath had left the body. But in this moment, grief had not yet begun. What held them was something else: uncertainty. They had not given up, but they could not help either. This was the space between loyalty and instinct, between staying and moving on. The calf shifted position and tried again. He placed his trunk on her face, gently nudging under the base of her jaw. Her eye opened just a sliver. Not fully, not long. But it was enough to meet his gaze for a heartbeat. The calf froze, then let out a faint wheeze, a sound too soft to echo but loud enough for Elias to turn his head. Then he lowered himself onto the ground beside her once more, laying his full weight into the curve of her side. The sky deepened toward orange, casting a warm hue across the clearing. The light bent gently through the haze, settling on the quiet forms of the elephant and her calf. Behind them, the wind stirred the grass just enough to carry the scent of earth and leaf. No one spoke. No one moved fast. The team worked with the stillness of those who knew the line between life and loss could shift without warning. They waited, and beside her, the smallest one waited too. The light had dropped low enough now that every shape stretched longer than itself. The edge of dusk colored the sky in faint lavender, folding gently into the dry horizon. The air had cooled just enough for the herd to settle into stillness again, though no one had relaxed. The calf had not shifted from his mother's side in over an hour, his breathing shallow, his posture leaning with quiet weight against her ribs. She remained as she had been, sedated, motionless but stable. The signs of exhaustion were plain, and though her eye had opened once, it had not stirred since. The team had reached the edge of waiting. Now came the part that could not be undone. The rescue truck rumbled up the slope in low gear, pausing several meters from the clearing. Its engine cut, and silence followed. A canvas sling lay coiled neatly in the back, padded and reinforced for elephant weight. The crane attached to the bed had been adjusted earlier in the day for quiet use and wrapped and fitted with cloth where metal might clang. Elias and Dr. Mumby moved first, coordinating the lifting mat placement with the field team. The stretcher would need to slide beneath her body without jarring her limbs. If she is startled, even once, the sedation might not be enough to hold her calm. 2 rangers moved in on either side, securing the ends of the mat with slow, deliberate hands. The straps cradled beneath her chest and hips, tightening without tension. The matriarch did not resist. Her breathing remained measured, almost too still. Dr. Mumby crouched beside her head, brushing the edge of her ear. She placed a hand flat on the shoulder and nodded to Elias. The signal was small, but it meant the balance had shifted again. They could no longer wait for her to rise on her own. Her body was past the point of voluntary effort. If they didn't lift her now, the risk of fatal compression would rise with every passing minute. The crane arm moved in tiny increments, rising without sound. The sling lifted slowly, only inches at a time, gently pulling her from the earth. Dust broke free beneath her weight. Her legs dangled limp, but her torso remained cradled in the tensioned mat. The first strain of motion made her groan, soft and muffled, but audible. The calf's response was instant. He bolted 2 steps back, his trunk raised high, and let out a short, high trumpet, sharp and lost. The herd stirred, ears flared, their collective posture alert and unsure. Elias moved toward the calf and lowered himself into the dirt, keeping his voice low and steady. He didn't reach out. He simply crouched beside him and whispered the same words he had spoken many times to panicked animals. "She's going to be okay." The calf shifted, his breath still quick but his legs stilled. He watched, wide-eyed, as his mother was suspended above the ground, her great form swaying gently with the slow motion of the crane. The team guided her to a low platform on the truck bed where she would be secured and transported to the mobile treatment pen. There, if her spine remained intact, they would rehydrate her fully, begin muscle recovery therapy, and monitor for internal trauma. The chances of survival had not improved, but they had not vanished either. She had lived long enough to reach this moment. Whether she would walk again was still unknown. The calf took another hesitant step forward, watching the lift from a distance. His tail flicked once. No sound came from him now, only his eyes moved. searching her shape as it was lowered into position, watching for the faintest sign that she was still the same figure who had once led him through rivers and brush without pause. The herd remained quiet behind him. No one left. No one turned away. As the sun slipped behind the ridge, its last stretch of light caught the dust beneath the truck and lit it like mist. The matriarch lay on her side now, cushioned, her frame secured gently to the platform. Her breathing was thin but steady. The calf stood facing her, the wind lifting his ears as the grass moved once more. A moment later the first stars appeared, faint above the horizon, blinking in the settling quiet. By dawn, the air was cool and quiet, blanketing the earth in stillness before the first heat could rise. The sky had not yet turned gold, but its edges hinted at day. In the shaded corner of a recovery pen built just beyond the clinic's main structure, the matriarch lay on a thick bed of soil and straw. Her body lined with blankets, her limbs half-curled, her skin dark with moisture from the night's misting. Her breath was slow but no longer strained. The sedation had faded, leaving behind exhaustion but not confusion. Nearby, the calf lay curled into her side, his head tucked beneath the arc of her trunk which had settled beside him sometime in the early hours. The team had rotated through the night. Vitals checked, IV bags changed. No unexpected decline, but no movement either. The lifting rig had done its job. Her spine held, her ribs remained aligned, and there were no signs of internal collapse. Still, the question remained. Would she stand? That answer couldn't be forced. It would come in the way all elephants chose to rise, when they were ready, and only then. And until that moment, every breath she took was a narrow line between hope and waiting. The calf stirred first, his small frame rising with a shiver as the first birds began to call beyond the fence. He stood, blinking against the pale light, then turned toward her. For a few seconds he simply watched. Her eye was closed. Her trunk lay heavy and unmoving. But then, slowly, it shifted. Just a fraction, enough to lift its tip and trace along his shoulder. He stepped closer, leaning into the contact as if reassured by the weight of it. She moved it again, brushing the side of his head. Then her eye opened. The ranger on watch, a quiet young man named Daniel, saw the movement and reached for the comm radio but hesitated. She was awake. That alone was worth a breath. But something else was happening too. The calf stepped back as her torso tensed just slightly. Her ears gave the smallest flick, and her front legs stretched forward across the straw. A low, almost inaudible rumble vibrated from her chest. Daniel remained where he was, still and low to the ground. No voice, no motion, no interference. With effort that shook dust from her skin, the matriarch pressed her chest upward, her front legs braced wide. The tension across her shoulders rippled beneath the folds of her skin. One foot locked in place, then the other. She leaned forward, groaning faintly, her jaw pressed close to the earth. For a long moment she paused, holding there, half lifted, the weight of her body suspended in decision. Then, inch by inch, she dragged her injured leg forward. It trembled violently. Her foot splayed unevenly as she tried to balance it beneath her. It slipped once, then found ground. She bore down, slowly, and then, without fanfare, without triumph, her foot touched the earth. The calf circled her quickly, almost frantic, but she remained still. Not frozen, not collapsed, just upright. Enough. Her back legs followed with care. She didn't stand fully, not yet, but she crouched into a low, kneeling stance that said something had returned to her. Control, intention. A will that had not left her. Daniel stepped backward, whispering through the radio that she was rising, but kept his eyes on her posture. Any shift could still lead to another fall. But she didn't falter. Her breathing deepened, her gaze was steady, and her body settled into the space as if anchoring itself for the long work ahead. Outside the pen, the wind moved gently through the grass. A few of the herd had begun calling in low, uncertain rumbles from the ridge nearby. Their sound distant but not detached. The calf answered with a short trill and pressed once again to her side. The sky opened wide above them, brushed with the soft pastels of morning. A bird landed on the fence post. The matriarch exhaled and closed her eyes, not from pain, not from fear, but from the weight of being held upright again. The first full light of day slipped across her back as the wind moved slowly through the trees.